This episode of the Crimson Post is brought to you by my Patreon supporters, including Sherry Harper, who is currently supporting at the $10 level. If you would like to help make episodes like this possible, please consider joining. The link is in the description. Salutations and welcome to the Crimson Post, where we talk about movies, science, video games, and more. I'm the Crimson Gentleman, and today we're talking about It, Chapter 2. But first, we have some business to conclude, because last episode, I started the all-new segment, Crimson Conundrums, where I pose a riddle to all of you, and, in between episodes, you see if you can solve it. I saw quite a few of you solve it in the comments below, and also on Facebook and Twitter, in our Facebook group, the Crimson League, as well as on Discord, also the Crimson League. For those of you who didn't hear it in the last episode, or just need a refresher, this was the riddle. Shauna was killed one Sunday morning. The police know who they are going to arrest from this bit of information. April was getting the mail. Alyssa was doing laundry. Reggie was cooking. Mark was planting in the garden. Who killed Shauna, and how did the police know who to arrest? Now, this riddle that we started with, I almost considered not using, because a lot of the time now, it's not as applicable anymore as it used to be. It's kind of like the classic doctor one. That one wouldn't even work at all today. Because for those of you who don't know, I'm never going to use this one because it just doesn't apply anymore. But an old classic riddle used to be, a father and his son were going for a drive, and they get in a car crash. The father is fine, but the son is critical, and so the ambulance rushes him to the hospital. He's taken into the emergency room, where suddenly the doctor who's going to operate on him stops and says, I can't operate on this boy. He's my son. How is this possible? That's the old riddle. That's the classic riddle. That's not today's riddle. And the reason it doesn't apply anymore is because at the time, it used to be a lot rarer for women to be doctors. And so it was surprising to people like, oh, I didn't think of that it could have been the mother. But nowadays it doesn't really apply, as more and more there are equal numbers of male and female doctors, and I think actually in some places, especially places like Sweden, it's getting to be where there are more female doctors than male doctors. So this one has a similar problem in that it's becoming more and more obsolete over time, though fans of Harry Potter might be able to figure it out if you remember a classic line from Mr. Dursley, where he says, no post on Sundays. And as you can see, Shauna was clearly killed by April. With that in mind, because April said that she was getting the mail. And the police knew that she couldn't have been getting the mail because the mail doesn't come on Sundays. If any of you who didn't get it probably are just used to the idea that mail does come on Sundays now a lot of the time in a lot of places, and there can be special deliveries. And especially since most things that you order don't come through the mail, they'll either come through UPS or FedEx or another courier service. So, a bit obsolete, but still pretty good. The one for today is less obsolete. So with last week's Crimson Conundrum out of the way, we can move on to the next segment, which is Crimson Corrections. In this segment, we basically talk about how wrong I am. We also talk about just anything that I want to clarify, add to, anything else I've thought of, if I've changed the way I feel or think about something. And there are quite a few things that I want to say about the Joker, yet again, or just Joker 2019. That's one correction of mine, is that it's Joker. It's the name of the show. In the last episode, I mentioned how Arthur has a disorder that, under stress, it causes him to lose control of his emotions, and this particularly with him manifests in uncontrollable laughing. And I did not mention what that disorder is called, and it is pseudobulbar affect, or also sometimes called emotional incontinence. And this disorder can manifest itself in a number of different ways. It also often displays itself as uncontrollable crying, and can have various triggers. It can be triggered by stress, it can be triggered by a mild amount of that emotion, but it becomes extreme. For example, sometimes people with pseudobulbar affect will cry for 10 minutes or even longer over something that made them only slightly sad, and they can't help it. It often comes paired with other disorders, such as schizophrenia, which is something Arthur also probably has, as he has difficulty distinguishing between reality and his fantasies, and not fantasies as in he's intentionally imagining them. Sometimes he is, but he can have trouble telling when his mind is playing tricks on him, is the old way that we might have said it, when he's having his hallucinations, which is one of the more common symptoms of schizophrenia. A lot of people, when they think of schizophrenia, they think of people who have multiple personalities, and that's not really correct. That comes from decades of movies and things calling that schizophrenia. Sometimes they call it multiple personality disorder, which is what it used to be called. Nowadays, it is more commonly referred to as dissociative identity disorder, or DID. That's where you have more than one personality. And a lot of the research that has been done on it has been found to be mostly unreliable. Usually when you have dissociative identity disorder, there are a lot of other problems that come with it. It's usually not multiple personalities. A lot of times it's simply having a difficult time associating with the world around you. It can give a feeling of being detached from what's actually happening. That's usually how it manifests itself. Though this is not always the case. Sometimes you do get coping mechanisms such as an alternate personality. Another circumstance in which pseudobulbar affect or emotional incontinence can manifest itself is after some kind of brain injury. Brain injuries can bring on a large host of problems, depending on what particular parts get damaged. And this actually, a lot of times, can help us learn about not just the conditions or the disorders that also display these symptoms, but can teach us how our brain works in general, which is very interesting, I think. Another thing I wanted to mention about the Joker is I do feel I was a bit more critical of it than I should have been, mostly because now the more I watch it, I went and I watched it again, and the more I think about it and the things that happen in the movie, the more I like it. I missed quite a few things I missed on the first viewing. For example, it was a lot more clear that the coworker did give him the gun, but then lied about it. Also, I came to the consideration that Thomas Wayne could very easily be lying, and he has every reason to be. And he definitely has the resources and the connections to forge the document stating that Arthur was adopted. Arthur clearly doesn't think about this, because when he finds out that he was adopted and summarily abused by his mother, his allegedly adoptive mother, and her boyfriend, and that could be what caused his disorder. It really does make sense, though, that he's not adopted. It would make more sense to me that the fact that there are documents stating that he is adopted to me, actually makes it far more likely that Thomas Wayne is lying. And the reason is because Arthur and his mother, Penny, have very similar disorders. Just because she has this disorder, that doesn't mean that she was lying. It could even be from the lobotomy that she received while she was in Arkham, at Thomas's request. Since they both have fairly similar mental issues, it makes more sense that they would be related, because issues like this are often shown to be genetic. It also seems to me very unlikely that somebody who was hospitalized, and it's unclear when he would have been adopted, if he was adopted, but it seems very unlikely that somebody who had been hospitalized would be able to adopt a child. And if it was beforehand, I would expect that he would remember not living with her, or that she maybe even would have the adoption revoked. Also, almost all of it could be fake. It's hard to tell what for sure is a memory, what he could have been imagining. The entire thing could have been made up in his head while he was speaking to his therapist in Arkham. But I prefer to think that the movie is mostly real and there are only bits of it that are fake. Also, on the second viewing, I really appreciated the dancing more. It illustrated very well how he was transitioning into his new identity as the Joker. As he becomes more and more comfortable as the Joker, he becomes more and more comfortable dancing. At first, he's dancing in the dark by himself. He's not very comfortable with it. But as he moves on, he's dancing in public. He's dancing to the music of the chaos as he's on the car during the rioting at the very end. The more that I think about it, the more that I appreciate different bits of it. I almost wish that they were going to do a sequel to it, because I would be very interested to see how this character becomes the Joker that could fight Batman and be opposed to him. I'd very much like to see where he ends up after this. And how potentially they could bring in his skin and getting bleached white, or something else, or maybe he just continues to use his makeup. Even that would be fine. It's also very interesting that it perfectly sets up the idea that he would not have his own identity or care about it, because now he believes, at least, that he is not really Arthur Fleck. He was adopted. He doesn't know who his parents are. He doesn't know who his father is. He doesn't know who his mother is. And so he has completely embraced the Joker and left Arthur Fleck behind. And so would most likely not even want to think or speak of it ever again. One last thing. While the movie is not a fantastic representation of a person with a mental illness, it is an excellent representation of how society can fail people who have mental disorders. It is a real problem today that we are far more concerned with our physical health than our mental health. People who seek help with their mental health are often ridiculed or seen as weak or ostracized, which is rather strange considering your physical health affects only you, for the most part. If people are dependent on you to be able to work, then your physical health might affect them, potentially. But your mental health affects everyone around you, everyone who has to deal with your mental health gets affected by it. When you go to the store, if you have anger issues, while you're driving, if you have anger issues, if you have psychotic episodes, if you have depression, these are things that all affect everybody else. They affect you too, but they also affect everyone else. Everyone is harmed by the way we treat mental disorders. So this movie does an excellent job of pointing that out. So that's everything I have to say in the corrections portion of this. And so now we're going to get on to the main topic. Namely, It Chapter 2. So, It Chapter 2, which was released on the 6th of September. And I don't have a budget for it. I guess they didn't release that information. But it made $91 million in its opening weekend. Since then, as of the 18th of October, it has pulled in $208 million domestically, and worldwide it has gotten $447 million. Critics have also given it a 63% score, at least on Rotten Tomatoes. That's the aggregate of it all. But audience scores have it at 78%. Both of those, I personally feel like, are low, actually. I really, really enjoyed this movie. I did not expect it to be as good as the first chapter. I thought that it would be less compelling with adult actors. I did not think that they were going to pick good actors. This was before I found out what the casting was. I didn't think it would be as compelling if they were adults instead of children. I thought that a large part of why it was frightening was because, of course, the children would be frightened of something like this. However, that was not the case at all. They picked excellent actors. I think everyone in the movie did a brilliant job acting. Even the children again. Not just the children from the first movie, but the new children in the movie. The way it was shot, the tension that was built. Originally, I was mostly just excited to see Pennywise and what he would do, and how they would animate it, how the effects would look, what kinds of things it would transform into, all those sorts of things. But it ended up being very funny. Again, the first one was funny. I think the second one might even be funnier. I'd have to watch the first chapter again to be sure. But it ended up being really very funny. It had some moments in it that I laughed really hard. I had seen the original It miniseries with the legendary Tim Curry as Pennywise. And I always did like it. But this one was far more frightening. They kept that terror, that tension up throughout the entire movie. They did a good job, and a large part of this probably has to do with Stephen King's writing, but they did an excellent job using other people than the Losers Club, using other people than the users, using people other than the Losers Club to build tension and fear, people who don't know what's going on. It was interesting that this time Pennywise had a serious vendetta against them, because he was going after other adults even, just to get their attention. If you're a fan of horror, and a fan of movies like John Carpenter's The Thing, even though this doesn't have very many, if any, practical effects for the monster bits, the CGI is believable. It does not look clunky or fake. The parts of it that look unreal look monstrously unreal. Look like, how could that thing do that? It looks like an actual shape-shifting creature. So if you like horror, if you're a fan of horror, but sometimes you get tired of the movies that are all horror all the time, it's constant tension, there's never any relief, then you'll definitely like this, because there are funny moments, there are heartwarming moments. The movie has a bit of everything. And I feel that those moments actually make the horror more compelling when it happens. Because you get a break, you get a rest. It makes it feel more like real life. You get lulled into a comfortable zone, and then it starts to creep in again. You maybe notice something in the background, but you couldn't quite catch what it was. So you're not sure if you saw something. It does a very good job of almost bringing you into the movie. So if you saw the first It Chapter 1, this is definitely a good follow-up to it. If you haven't seen it, you're considering seeing it, definitely get it, watch it on Blu-ray when it comes out, or on DVD, get it from Redbox, watch it on Netflix if they release it on Netflix. Any way that you can go and see it whenever you're hearing this, I definitely would give it a shot. If you haven't seen It Chapter 1, watch that too. They're both excellent movies. They did a great job adapting Stephen King's story into the modern day. With that, we're going to be getting into spoilers now. And like last time, I'll kind of go through the movie from beginning to end a bit more quickly this time, kind of commenting on what I can remember and what I thought of certain things. So we started out with a previously on It scene. It doesn't say that, but that's kind of how it feels. It's showing them making the blood pact again, in case you forgot that from last time. After that, it moves on to the modern day with a couple people that we haven't met before. Somebody who used to live in Derry and then moved back and has brought his boyfriend with him for the festival that they're having. The people in the town are prejudiced against them and start to call them names. A teenager, a very young teenager, gets in their way, harasses them, sort of illustrating how kids tend to learn these things young. I was still surprised at the way they treated them. The way I grew up, that's not how you spoke to anybody older than you, no matter what. I really wanted to see some kind of comeuppance for those guys, and it never happened, which I was disappointed with. The two fellows, they leave alone and are completely oblivious to the fact that those guys are obviously going to be following them. Anytime idiots like that start to harass you, they're not going to just let you go away, especially into the dark, into the night, alone, far from anybody. it is sort of strange how few people there are right on the outskirts of a large festival. I would have expected to see a lot more people than that. But since there aren't, those guys jump them. They both get beaten up pretty bad, with the teenager joining in. Then they throw the boyfriend over the bridge, and he's floating down the river. So the other guy runs down onto the ground, is trying to save him. He got washed up onto the shore, and then there's Pennywise. He's got him. Or, well, he helps him out of the river, and then proceeds to munch on his ribs. I believe he kills both of them and then uses their blood to write on the walls, "Come back home," or something similar to that. So then as Mike calls them all, they have kind of forgotten what's going on. Something about Pennywise or the town has caused them to forget as they get further away. They've all moved on. A lot of them are married. So Mike's calling them back, telling them they have to come back. The one kid is... he's an adult now. He's no longer a kid. But the one... I forget what his name is. He can't go back. He's afraid. And so ends up committing suicide. The others all assemble. Basically Avengers Assemble style. Beverly has married somebody basically like her father, an abusive jerk. But she gets out of there, kicks his ass, leaves him behind, which was an excellent scene. I really enjoyed that. We see that Henry Bowers is in the insane asylum. Ben lost a lot of weight, and so they all come back together. They have a dinner where they remember everything. It's a neat scene. It's heartwarming. It shows everything that happened in the last movie. Not everything, but it shows them remembering. You have the fortune cookies, and I was wondering, are the fortunes going to be true when they open them? But then it turns out they're actually a puzzle, and it turns out Beverly has Stanley. That was the guy who killed himself. Stanley, she has the name Stanley. That's what came out of hers. They all have one word on their fortune, and they mix around, and it turns out to be, guess Stanley could not cut it. And they're all freaked out suitably. The restaurant scene is very good, though it kind of bothered me. This happened several times throughout, where the guy is shouting that it's not real, and yet at the exact same time is hitting the table with a chair, like it's going to kill it. Not realizing that obviously, since it is fake, it doesn't matter, you don't need to kill it, but also everyone in the restaurant can see what you're doing, and they can't see what it is you're trying to fight. So you just look insane. Throughout the entire movie, Pennywise is just making them look crazy. This is something that kept coming up, and I thought would end up coming out and being an issue. The fact that these 6 people have just been acting psychotic throughout the town, but it just never comes up. They all, over time, keep deciding whether or not they want to leave. And they have arguments over it, deciding whether or not there's a reason to stay, things like that. Then we cut to the first child death in the movie, where a very bad parent just ignores their little girl while watching a baseball game, to the point that it's quite frankly ridiculous that she's just ignoring her that much. So the girl walks away. She's self-conscious about a birthmark on her face, and Pennywise uses that to lure her closer. If it wasn't that, it would have been something else, and the girl gets eaten. Of course, before that, she did have some excellent logic. She was wondering, well, why are you hiding in the shadows then, if you're a good person? But then Pennywise outthinks her yet again, and takes advantage of her vanity. Later in the movie, they're all trying to find their artifacts, and so we go one by one as they try to find them, and Pennywise messes with them one by one, not immediately killing them, clearly because he has a vendetta against them, is just happy they're back, doesn't think that there's any chance that they're going to do anything at all to him. And so he's just playing with them. One thing that was interesting is that even after they had defeated Pennywise, they kept seeing things before they left that should have been a clue that he wasn't actually fully dead. And I guess that's possibly why they left, because they were still being harassed by these terrible hallucinations that Pennywise was causing. We see those throughout the movie, that each kid had their own hallucinations. There was a great Stephen King cameo as the pawn shop broker that Bill gets his bike back from. The bike seemed to be adult-sized when Bill was riding it as an adult, but child-sized when he was riding it as a kid. It didn't seem like a kid's bike, and it didn't seem overly large on him when he was a child, so it seems like the bike grew. I don't know if that's just sort of an illusion, or if it's a mistake on their part, or they just figured no one would notice or care. Probably very few people did. They kind of all keep falling for obvious tricks. Some of the scenes make me wonder what the point was of defeating it when they were kids, because it seems like it still harassed them a lot. I guess maybe it ended the killings early, possibly, but it didn't seem to have any effect on actually potentially destroying it. Later, after they all regroup at the house, the one guy got puked on, went upstairs, Bill comes back, Bill and Bev are talking to each other. They share a kiss. And then one of the best lines in the movie, Bev says something like, "Should we be running?" And so a skateboard is coming down the stairs. A skateboard like the kid's skateboard that Bill's talking to, trying to save. And Bev's like, "Should we be running?" And Bill's like, "This is Derry. I'm kind of getting used to it," which I thought was really funny. So the skateboard comes down the stairs, the blood's floating up. He sees on the bottom basically a warning that the Pennywise is going to come after the kid. He freaks out, goes off on his own. And then the one guy who got puked on, he's in the bathroom. And and Bowers is behind him and stabs him right in the cheek. Which then the guy who got stabbed stumbles into the shower. And then he closes the curtain as Bowers is making fun of him for it. And then as he gets close, one of the best things in the movie, he stabs him through the shower curtain. And then Bowers is like falling back and he's like stunned. And the guy just like almost sneaks out along the wall. One of my favorite scenes. And then Ben, a lot of them have B names. So then Ben notices that Bowers is leaving, follows him, ends up following him to the library where Mike is. And ends up saving him from Bowers, ending him with a tomahawk to the head. I was kind of surprised that Bowers could hold his own against Mike. Mike seems very much in shape. I would have thought that he would have handled him easily, but it seems like it could have been enhancing him in a lot of ways. After all, he did just climb 3 stories into the bathroom out the window and then fall out of it and just walk to his car fine. So then we see Bill at the festival where the kid is gone, and he starts yelling at the kid and running after him into the Hall of Mirrors. Just completely making a scene. It seemed to me that this is just what it wants. It wants to make them seem crazy. Like, Bill's going to get arrested because of this. How could he not? He's shouting at a child and then running at him at this festival. So then he goes into the Hall of Mirrors. He's trying to find them, bumping into things, classic Hall of Mirrors scene. And then he finally finds the kid, and he's on one side, and the kid's in this glass box, and it's in the other. I don't know how the kid got in there. The kid couldn't run. I guess it changed the room because the kid could not get out, and even it had to bash its way through. I get the feeling that it was taking more time than it had to get through the mirror. And then the kid sadly dies. I was hoping he would make it out, but I'm not surprised that he did. That's kind of what the movie's about. So Bill then decides he's alright, he's going to finish this, he's going to go to the place, and everyone meets him there. They meet him at the old house that leads down into the tunnel where it lives. They fight a spidery head of their old friend. So they then go down there, they go down the ship. Bev gives the guy who's been scared, who had the inhaler, gives him a monster killer. They go down there, they do the ritual pulls the deadlights from the air down into the container, but the balloon comes out and pops, and then it's huge and giant, and then it reveals that Mike had lied to him the entire time. The people who performed the ritual before, it didn't work, they got killed, which is a question I'd had toward the beginning of the movie. If this ritual works, how come it's still around? Seems like a question I would have asked in real life. I've been like, Mike, what makes you think this is definitely going to work? It didn't seem to work last time. And so they proceed to have a battle with it. They have different visions. The two of them come upon 3 doors. One that says not scary at all, scary, and really scary. They try to outthink it. They probably all had something scary behind them, but at the end of it, they go for very scary first, and it is something very scary. So then they go to not scary at all. It's like, oh, it's not messing with us. It's not reversed. And then this is just a puppy, and like, oh, it's a cute puppy. And then, of course, that's scary as well. And then they just run away because the arm that was trying to get them is gone. And so like, next time we'll just go for regular scary. So then they're having the battle, and the one guy who's the comedian now is like, he throws a rock, or goes to throw a rock at it, and it just blasts him with the deadlights, just full on, which looked very scary and gruesome. So then the one kid who got stabbed takes his monster killer and he throws it, and it hits him right in the mouth. But of course the problem is that the physical manifestation is less the actual real part of it. At least this is how I was seeing it at the time. And it's a shapeshifter. So shapeshifters by default have healing properties. So then they all figure out that, well, it has to abide by the rules of the form it inhabits. So if we can get it to shrink down, then we can kill it. But then it blocks him off, it traps him. Oh yeah, the one kid gets stabbed after he threw the thing into it because he looks away. They always do. So he's slowly dying. But then they realize if they just don't believe it is scary. If they just... Basically what they realized in the first one, if they just act like it's not scary, if they believe they can take it, then it shrinks down into a little clown man, and they rip its heart out and crush it. I liked the ending form a lot more in this one than in the original It movie, because in the original one it's just a big old spider looking thing. This one it was spidery, but they kept the form of Bill Skarsgård and the clown for the most part, just changing it to be even scarier, which I think looks a lot more frightening, and it can actually still have dialogue and stuff to do. So then they all, the one guy who got stabbed does die. They all get out of there. Everything collapses in. They go to the quarry, have moments and things. And then later, they've all gone back to their separate lives, but they're not forgetting it. And so Mike and Bill have a conversation. They're talking on the phone with each other. And Bill asks him, why do you think that we're remembering it still? Why do you think we're not forgetting it? And Mike's like, well, maybe it's because it's dead. It's like, okay. He has a pause. He's like, maybe it's because we have more that we want to remember than we want to forget. And Bill's like, I like the second one. Which to me, I'm just thinking, actually, I'd much rather that it be that it's dead. Because that just proves that he's dead. If it's just because we want to remember this time, then it could still be alive. That doesn't sound like a good thing at all. So I don't know why he would prefer the second one to the idea that it's dead. And so then it ends with a note from Stanley. He sent out a letter to everybody saying, I know this seems like a suicide note, but it's not. And just explains that since he knew that he was too afraid to go back, he also knew that if all the ones who were alive weren't together, they wouldn't be able to do it. So he killed himself so that he wasn't part of the game anymore. He said he took himself off the board so that he wasn't a factor in how strong they were. Basically so that he'd be with them in spirit, since he couldn't manage to do it physically. By the end of it, I had a really good time. It was scary, it was funny, it was heartfelt. It had some great scenes, really good CGI. I think it was a super good movie. I'd probably, if I had to give it a percentage, I'd probably give it closer to 85 or 90%. I don't think I could have been happier with the sequel. I don't know if there's anything they could have done to make it better. But yes, it would have been possible to be a better movie, theoretically, but I don't think there's anything they could practically have done to make me enjoy it more than I did. So it was just about as perfect as it could be. And so with that is the end of our spoiler section. Now we're going to move on to the next segments of the show. It's time for Crimson Conundrums. This week's riddle is a bit of a shorter one. Sometimes the shorter ones can be harder, even because you have less information. This one also is not a detective-style one, but is more of a classic riddle. Some of you may even know it already, if you're a fan of riddles. If you are not, give it a think, and you just might be able to figure it out. What can go up a chimney down, but can't go down a chimney up? So that's your riddle. Give that a think, and I'll give you the answer on next week's episode. So with that, thank you all so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please give the episode a like. Comment anything you have to say about it down below. Comment your answers to the riddle. And please share it with your family and friends, or any Facebook groups or other groups that you think might enjoy it or be interested in this episode or any part of it. I'll be here again next week, the same Crimson time, the same Crimson channel. Farewell.